So my name is Ying-Chan Pan. I'm an assistant professor of art history in art history program under the umbrella of art department. And my specialty is actually modern and contemporary Chinese art. And photography is, another leg of what I'm very interested in. So for a long time, especially during Meiji period, photography was considered a scientific device that captured reality. So that was very much similar to the development in the West. And the appearance of fine art photography was again a borrowed idea from especially from England. So we can say that the emergence of fine art photography that treated photography as a fine art genre was as early as 1905. When some amateur photographers, they felt that it was high time for them to discover photography as a kind of art. So they were trying to find out how they could utilize this media to capture things that is not aiming at making documentation. And this was actually very popular in 1910s to early 1920s. Until 1923, when there was that great Tokyo earthquake that basically destroyed the great contemporary Tokyo area. So that year marked a watershed, because before 1923, we do see a very thriving community of photographers working on fine art photography, but after that, a new development replaced this community. That would be the emergence of a new group that is called New Photography. So from this part, we also see the beginning of photojournalism, because they started to feel that to look back to 19th century, to the original function of photography as a scientific device to document what they saw. And indeed, this was an exciting moment in Japanese history, because you really had an opportunity to rebuild a city completely because of this natural disaster. So they wanted to document that change, but with more artistic flavor in that. But photojournalism would eventually replace new photography, especially starting from late 1930s, when Japan was in full swing of its warfares in Asia and in Pacific region, because for the Japanese authority, they felt that photography was a very important medium to manipulate. Practically, it documented the war, and the documented images, if they were displayed successfully or tactically displayed, then that could encourage the Japanese people to convince them that the war was legitimate. So photojournalism was promoted by Japanese authority. When Japan was under U.S. occupation, the avant-garde movements all came back. It's interesting because for the U.S. Military force, they did not treat avant-garde art as a kind of threat. And they actually opened a lot of cultural centers and allowed for the circulation of art magazines. So this part of avant-garde photographers suddenly revived. But this revival should be understood as the fact that it never died. Even though it was repressed a lot by the Japanese authority, but the artists somehow survived that time period. So after 1945, it took no time for them to reappear and to assert themselves. But of course, what they looked at was very different, because now that kind of exciting urban life was no longer their focus. It was more about their internal the needs of finding themselves again, to rebuild their own identity. Because before 1945, that sentiment was very militant. But now Japan as a country was defeated, and even occupied by the U.S. So a lot of these avant-garde artists actually started to look at not look at the external urban life, but to create abstract images of expressing this kind of anxiety of losing the previous identity and on the path of finding their new one. And there was a important turning point, though, that would be 1968. So we all know that that was a very much troubled years for many countries, both in U.S., in Europe, and in Japan as well. In Japan especially, because in addition to student movements that basically was responding to what happened in Paris, and the anti-war, Vietnam War that was in response to U.S. Local society in Japan was also very much against the Japanese government cowardness in the face of American occupation. They wanted more and more American military force out of Japan, so there was a very huge anti-American base movement at the same time too. So for photojournalism, photographers would divert to document all these incidents, and there were a lot of conflicts. So their styles also grew more violent and much sharper. So that would be a turn of their styles because of these incident. And then another very important current, we would have to jump to 1980s. That would be the introduction of feminism to Japan. As we all know that the traditional Japanese society really did not give much room for women to be active as an artist in public, and even for the other occupations. But with the introduction of feminism and other developments of women's emancipation, we do see a quite interesting emergence of women as artists and photographers. And in terms of women photographers, I think they really utilized photography as a way to fight back a lot of stereotypes and sexualized imagination of women, female body. So there was a quite interesting type of photography that is called girls photography. In Japanese, it's called onnanoko no shashin. And that kind of photography is quite interesting and disturbing because they take very sweet and juicy colors and very suggested compositions. But at the same time, it arouses your, especially for male viewers, voyeuristic imagination, and very much a Lolita type of models. It also makes you feel guilty to look at those photographs. So it definitely, the troubling part is how it makes you feel like a little bit embarrassed or guilty. And so that can be understood as a way of Japanese women artists. I think revolution. I would call it a revolution because before 1990s, the Japanese photography was mostly controlled or dominated by male photographers and their point of view. And in terms of the images of female body, we see a lot of erotic images, such as the photography, this kind of patriarchal gaze, and by that. They did not create a new kind of composition. Rather, they borrowed from these photographers, but then added their own criticism by giving very vivid colors and a little bit troubling angles, even the choice of models. So that would be the most exciting development.